Good morning, children. Do you know, children, what is this Shakespearean play that is taught in class 10th? Would you love to study a story or a lesson that is taught in a higher class? Today we are going to begin a very interesting story from the book 16 Tales from Shakespeare. Shakespearean tales are all wonderful and full of life lessons. Not only do they provide us with expressions and language of the greatest dramatist in English, but it also strengthens our values and helps children build up virtues and stresses on staying away from all kinds of vices. This lesson also would help strengthening of values such as the withdrawal from all selfish thoughts and actions, and by stressing on good values such as the virtues of courtesy, benignity, generosity, and humanity. So let us turn over to page 57 for lesson number 6, The Merchant of Venice, which is also the ICSE Council's syllabus for Standard 10 students. So the story has a plot and subplots. The main plot being the bond between Antonio and Shylock. Then the subplots, the love between Portia and Bassanio, the elopement of Shylock's daughter Jessica with Lorenzo, and the ring story. There are some more subplots. So let's begin the play. Let's begin the story right from page 57. So, Shylock the Jew lived at Venice. He was an usurer who had amassed an immense fortune by lending money at great interest to Christian merchants. Now, Shylock was a Jew. Who are Jews? Jews or Jewish people are an ethno-religious group and a nation originating from the Israelites and Hebrews of historical Israel and Judah. Their religion is Judaism. Jews in Europe were the victims of discrimination and persecution since the Middle Ages, often for religious reasons. Now, Christians saw the Jews, their faith, as an aberration that had to be squashed. So Jews were restricted in professing their religion in Europe, and Shylock, because he practiced usury, was hated. So what is usury, or who's an usurer? A usurer, the word here, is a person who gives off or lends money on higher rates. And therefore Shylock was hated in Venice. He was a merchant of Venice and he was hated. So he had amassed, that is, he had gathered immense lot of fortune by lending money at great interest to Christian merchants. So those who needed money, he would lend money. This was his business, lending money and taking back or getting back more than what he actually lent. So Shylock, being a hard-hearted man, exacted the payment of the money he lent with such severity that he was much disliked by all good men, and particularly by Antonio, a young merchant of Venice, and Shylock as much hated Antonio because he used to lend money to people in distress and would never take any interest for the money he lent. So let's go back to this line once again. Shylock, being a hard-hearted man. Shylock is described here as a hard-hearted man, meaning a man with a heart that was hard, meaning he had no softness or no emotions towards because of his business, and he exacted the payment of the money. So when he gave money, he would see that he gets back or obtains or demands the money back at the right time with the rates that he had given them. So he lent with such severity, harshness, that he was much disliked by all good men. So good people disliked him. Particularly, he was disliked by Antonio, who was also a young merchant of Venice. And Shylock as much hated Antonio. Now, Shylock had a hatred for Antonio because he spoilt his business. How? He used to lend money to people in distress. Now, this Antonio used to give money to people who needed or was in distress, trouble, and would never take any interest for the money he lent. So, he would not take any interest for the money, whereas Shylock was taking interest and the interest rates were pretty high. So, therefore, people hated him in Venice. But at the same time, Antonio was really admired and loved by the people around or the people of Venice who knew him. Therefore, there was great enmity between this covetous Jew and the generous merchant Antonio. So there was great enmity. There was great enmity going on between this covetous, that is, this greedy Jew, and the generous merchant Antonio. So we here in this paragraph we come to know the difference between Shylock and Antonio. Shylock being a hard-hearted man and Antonio with a soft heart. Shylock taking interest in while lending money, and Antonio who would lend money but never take any interest for it. So there's a big difference between these two merchants. So whenever Antonio met Shylock on the Rialto or exchange, he used to reproach him with his usuries and hard dealings, which the Jew would bear with seeming patience while he secretly meditated revenge. So whenever Antonio met Shylock on the Rialto, now what is the Rialto? Rialto is the stock exchange of Venice. It's the place where the merchants would meet and they would talk about business, and they had their business dealings over there. So this was the stock exchange of Venice. Just like we have the Bombay Stock Exchange in India, same way they had the Venice Stock Exchange named the Rialto. So he used to reproach him. Who? Antonio. Whenever Antonio would meet Shylock, he would rebuke him. He would call him all sorts of names and tell him that what he was doing is not right, and reproach him with his usuries and hard dealings. So he would talk about his hard dealings and the way he treated people in Venice, which the Jew would bear with seeming patience. And the Jew and this Shylock would listen to all his bickerings or all his reproach or all his rebuke without saying a single thing. Without it would seem that he had a lot of patience because he never answered back while he secretly meditated revenge. But was he really not angry? Secretly, in his mind, he meditated, he pondered, or he thought about taking revenge. So this is from the paragraph we come to know that Shylock was a Jew and he was a merchant in Venice. And what was his business? His business was money lending. And Antonio is another young merchant of Venice who used to give money when people were in distress. But that was not his original business. He had other businesses also. But he would lend money but never take any interest. So we move on to the next page. Now, this is the picture of Shylock, the old Jew, the money lender. So here's Antonio, the young merchant of Venice. These are the two characters we have just talked about. Now we move on to the second paragraph. Antonio was the kindest man that lived, the best conditioned, and had the most unwearied spirit in doing courtesies. So Antonio was the kindest man that ever lived. So the best condition. Now condition here means experienced, sober, or the person who has learned a lot through experience, and now he is conditioned to all what's happening, and had the most unwearied spirit in doing courtesies. So he was all the more always kind to all his fellow beings. He was very courteous. So he showed a lot of courtesies to everyone who met him and whom he met. So helping out, being kind, being polite, being good, these were the characteristic of Antonio. Indeed, he was one in whom the ancient Roman honor more appeared than in any that drew breath in Italy. So Shakespeare says that he was one of a kind, one person who had the ancient honor, Roman honor, that appeared in him than in any person who drew breath, who ever lived in Italy. A person who ever breathed in Italy, meaning a person who ever lived in Italy. Nobody had such a lot of honor, ancient Roman honor, than this man Antonio. So Shakespeare is praising him like anything. He was greatly beloved by all his fellow citizens. So Antonio was greatly loved by all his fellow citizens, his groups, friends, neighbors, everyone loved him. But the friend who was nearest and dearest to his heart was Bassanio. So Bassanio was his bosom friend, his fast friend, and very much dear to him. A noble Venetian. So Bassanio was a Venetian also, who having but a small patrimony had nearly exhausted has little fortune by living in too expensive a manner for his slender means, as young men of high rank with small fortunes are too apt to do. So here we get the characteristic of Bassanio in this sentence. So Bassanio was dearest and his near and dear friend was a noble Venetian, was of a high ranking, high birth, a Venetian, who having but a small patrimony. So he had a small estate, or he was entitled to a small estate of which he had inherited from his father, had nearly exhausted his little fortune, and he had exhausted all his money, his fortune, by living too expensive a manner for his slender means. So he lived beyond his means. That is, he is a man who was a spendthrift. In common words or simple word, we can say he was a spendthrift. So he was a person who would spend a lot. And even though he had slender means, that is, he has meager means, very little means, or he could afford very little, still he lived in high fashion and spent a lot, as of high noblemen of his days did. So young men of high rank with small fortunes would live in a high style and spending a lot of money. Same way Bassanio would spend a lot of money, not thinking about his meager means. So whenever Bassanio wanted money, Antonio assisted him. So his friend Antonio would assist him, and it seemed as if they had but one heart and one purse between them. I hope you have understood the last line, and beautifully it is given that it seemed both friends had one single heart and one purse between them. So it was not like whatever Antonio had was Bassanio's also, because both of them had one heart. So both of them were very close to each other, and whatever Antonio had, because Antonio was rich, was Bassanio's too. So you can see the two friends here, Antonio and this is Bassanio. So they loved each other a lot and they would always be together. So we move on to the next line. One day Bassanio came to Antonio and told him that he wished to repair his fortune by a wealthy marriage with a lady whom he dearly loved, whose father, that was lately dead, had left her sole heiress to a large estate, and that in her father's lifetime he used to visit at her house when he thought he had observed this lady, had sometimes from her eyes sent speechless messages that seemed to say he would be no unwelcome suitor, but not having money to furnish himself with an appearance befitting the lover of so rich an heiress, he besought Antonio to add to the many favors he had shown him by lending him 3,000 ducats. So one day what happened, Bassanio came to Antonio and told him that he wished to correct his fortune or to fill up his fortune by a wealthy marriage with a lady whom he dearly loved. This much is clear. So he wished to marry a wealthy lady, a lady who was fortunate to be wealthy, whose father, that was lately dead, recently the father had died, had left her sole heiress to a large estate. So this lady had become the sole heiress, the only heiress. She had inherited her father's large, big estate property, and that in her father's lifetime, he used to visit at her house. So when her father was alive, Bassanio used to go to her house and visit her. When he thought he had observed this lady, and he thought that he saw that this lady had sometimes from her eyes sent speechless messages, and this lady had sometimes sent speechless message without speech, that from her eyes she would show some kind of signs that he thought that she loved him, that seemed to say he would be no unwelcome suitor. So those signs told him that he would be very much a welcome suitor, no unwelcome. No is a negative word, un is also a negative word. Two negative makes it positive. So he would be a welcome suitor there, but not having money to furnish himself with an appearance befitting the lover. So he did not have that much of money to dress up in a befitting manner of a lover so rich an heiress, a lover of an heiress who is so rich. He should also dress up according to her status, and he besought Antonio. So he seeks Antonio, he asks Antonio, or he requests Antonio to add to the many favors he had shown him, to add up or give him or show him once again some favor by lending him 3,000 ducats. So he asked him 3,000 ducats to lend. Antonio had no money by him at that time to lend his friend. Now at that time when he asked him money, Antonio had no money with him. Why? Because he had spent all his money on his ships. Now these ships were on sale to various parts of Europe and other parts of the world, but expecting soon to have some ships come home laden with merchandise, he said he would go to Shylock, the rich money lender, and borrow the money upon the credit of those ships. So he told Bassanio not to worry, because he is expecting some of the ships to come laden with money and merchandise, and as soon as he would before the ships arrive, he would go to Shylock, the rich money lender, and borrow money from him upon the credit of those ships. So he would give him the instant, or he would tell him about the ships that are returning, and on credit of those ships he would get money from Shylock and give it to Bassanio. So Antonio and Bassanio went together to Shylock, and Antonio asked the Jew to lend him 3,000 ducats upon any interest he should require. So what happened? Antonio went to ask Shylock the money for his best friend and the Jew. So how much did they want? They wanted 3,000 ducats upon any interest he should require. So what did Antonio tell him? That you can take any kind of interest. Whatever you require, he is ready to pay. Now I leave you with this. So we've completed page 57, and here I leave you with this page. And you see here Bassanio, who is going to woo Portia, whom he loves. Now this is fair Portia, the beautiful girl, the rich heiress. So we have this, and of course now the next day we'll be doing the rest of the pages. So I hope you loved the story, and will continue. So, thank you.